All right. Well, good morning, Chris. Thanks for joining me.
Well, Joe, always good to see you. And I say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who's with us today. For you and I, it's this morning at least.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And to our folks across the pond, good evening, good afternoon. Thank you, everyone who was able to tune in this morning to join us for our Ask the Expert session with Chris Vollmar. Uh, so before we get into it and do some introductions, want to just kind of set the table by talking about how in today's healthcare environment, really the reason that we're here talking today, we are seeing a surge in cyber attacks that put both patient safety and hospital operations, of course, at serious risk. So for our Ask the Expert session today, we have Chris Vollmar joining us, and we're going to share some insights into the critical security and resiliency challenges that IT healthcare teams are grappling with. So we'll put some time diving into specific vulnerabilities and make these and talk about how these systems can be a prime target for cyber criminals. Explain how ransomware can severely disrupt hospital workflows and affect the quality and continuity of patient care. So joining me today, we have Chris Vollmar from IBM. Chris, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Chris Vollmar, as you said. I'm part of the worldwide storage technical team. I have a focus on cyber and data resiliency across, say, primary and secondary storage. The other part of my life is actually working with security teams, whether they be IBM internal security teams or customer security teams, kind of bridging that discussion gap between cybersecurity and data resilience. And like I think that's going to be a thing we end up talking a lot about today is like there is that space now between I have cybersecurity, but I also need to think about data resilience or cyber resilience. And the market, in fairness, and the analysts haven't always necessarily landed on a term yet. So I end up using both a lot of the time, just so it fits or it hits the point of like this is kind of different than cybersecurity. So you hear me often say a lot of data resilience, so it doesn't get confused. But yeah, that's part of my life. And that's kind of what I'm doing every day.
Yeah, well, we appreciate it. Thanks again for joining us.
Oh,
All
you're
right.
very welcome. Where do you want to start today?
Why don't we just jump into it? So
Sure.
we are seeing healthcare organizations that are targeted at an alarming rate, unfortunately. From your perspective, working especially with Epic implementations across IBM's healthcare clients, what are healthcare providers looking for in the way of resiliency?
It's a really good question, and I'd say there's a couple of things to think about. Really, from a resiliency perspective, what the organizations are looking for is, hey, how do I integrate with my cybersecurity environment? So I've got a great investment in all of my cybersecurity. I've got a great set of tooling. I'm doing a lot of those things that we hear around. I'm driving towards a zero trust architecture, driving towards a zero trust framework. I'm looking to get signal from noise from all of my alerting. That's an important practice. What we end up having a conversation, what a lot of customers are talking to us about is, okay, now how do I augment that with the ability to recover? Now, we all watch the news, we all read the trade, we know that there is data and threats to data is maybe the better way to frame it. So now the question becomes, okay, if something happens, and if some and no system is perfect, so no one can tell you any system is perfect. If something happens, how do I recover my key core applications? Sometimes you'll hear me talk about things like minimum viable company. How do I recover my minimum viable healthcare organization, my minimum viable hospital? How do I recover the core parts of it? And also how can I augment my understanding of and augment my ability to understand if there is an impact happening, right? If there's real-time corruption happening, if there's an unseen corruption in the data set somehow, if the application that I rely on specifically is being impacted, how do I start to zone in there no sooner and then be able to react faster? Because just like any, of all the critical industries, healthcare is probably the most critical industry in terms of I need to be able to be back up and active, or I need to be able to be providing core services as quickly as possible because of the criticality
Right.
of the industry that healthcare is, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think in that this industry in particular, we talk about minimum viable company a lot with IBM. No place is it more important than healthcare, right? Because
Yeah.
getting those critical minimum applications back up and running. Again, it's not just about the bottom line, although that's certainly a part of it. It's about patient safety and patient care and being able to serve those patients. So definitely, especially critical with Epic and healthcare environments.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Speaking
And
of,
it is like, how do I manage that? How do I get the right data to the right people at the right time? That's kind of the in fairness, that's the life of an infrastructure person, a storage person, is how do I get the right data to the right people at the right time? Maybe the addition to that conversation now is the right people, the right data to the right time, and the right clarity, the right accuracy, the right trust for the data. How do the really it's that how do I also now trust that data that I could recover it, I can use it, I can leverage it. All of that becomes that next layer because it is this type of resiliency gets different than what our traditional DR practices are. And you can we can leverage those muscles. I understand I understand how to do that kind of exercise in terms of a DR, but I'm living in a different space now because at a data corruption or deletion, any kind of event like that, I'm doing targeted recoveries. I'm doing, I have to test and validate to see if the data is good, or I have to know proactively if the data is good. Because that's like for me, that's the important part is proactively, is that data good? Because otherwise I might have to spend X number of hours validating that data, which is time I can't get the right data to the right people at the right time to come back up into service.
yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, I'm sure, later. But
Yeah.
if you talk about trust in data, it reminds me of the focus on data integrity that we have in index
Hmm.
engines, right? When you think of the pillars of resiliency, it's validating that you have data with integrity to recover from is really our bread and butter.
Well, and
So
I think
speaking
that's
of,
to your
go ahead.
point. Yeah, like that's part of that. Like part of that key discussion is how do I actually know the integrity of the data, and I need to know it at that application level or at the
Mhm.
hypervisor level or both. Because in fairness, in the healthcare organizations I work with, like we there's a predominant amount of hypervisors, so I need to understand the hypervisor and the VMs in those hypervisors are clean, and I also need to know that my core application is clean because I
Yeah,
need to be able to recover it. And then it gets into like how do I determine those? We'll keep talking about it, but that's the yeah for me that's how do I improve my recoverability. And for me it's always how do I get to be proactively aware of my available recovery points, right? All of my fallback points, do I proactively have them done because that means I don't have to spend time reactively doing them.
yeah, yeah. I like that word. Proactive is an important element of this that
Yeah.
we don't talk about enough. So Epic systems obviously contain some of the most sensitive and critical data in healthcare, and we're kind of on the topic of Epic already. So what are some of the unique security challenges that Epic environments face that might not be present in other applications?
There's a couple of things there, and I mean like the some of the unique security challenges is also how do I protect and manage the access to that data. So not only do we like there's two I think there's maybe two challenges I hear from our customers when we get talking about this. One is recoverability, right? How do I recover? um, how do I recover? How do I come back? How do I see that data? The other one becomes, so that's let me put that in the big broad stroke of malware, ransomware, right? How do I can recover that data set. The other one, to your point, that comes up a bunch or has started coming up even more is how do I understand if something like data exfiltration is happening? Because this is also like the other security challenge that I would argue that we deal with in healthcare specifically is PII, PHI. That sensitive health data is a thing.
Yeah,
There are extra guardrails, there are extra requirements, and it's certainly an extra target to before the data gets spoiled and the system goes offline. Can I extract it because there's value to it that the bad actors want to leverage? So the other one is also like how do I deal with that? So the other half of that, the other side of that coin is recovery, and the other security thing is how do I manage access to that data set? How do I deal with who's accessing it, when they're accessing it, if they're the right people accessing it? And this actually kind of like I'll dovetail that in to say that like part of that is for us in IBM, and as we work together with you guys, that's also the strength of the larger kind of IBM teams because we have like I have colleagues, I have peers inside the data security group, and those are the people I partner with on kind of the regular. Okay, if we're looking at an architectural solution, if I'm looking at an architectural problem of how do I solve problems, part of that is okay, I got to me an infrastructure provide that recoverability. And then the other part is, okay, what about access? What about exfiltration? That's where I kind of bring in folks from my data security peers inside the business to talk about, well, what are the things we could do about that to make sure that, you know, Joe, if you're the DBA, you actually are the real, you really are Joe, and you really are supposed to be accessing those tables and those records, as opposed to, not to be glib, right? But it's Joe, but it's really Joe in a hoodie, so it's not actually Joe. It's just somebody in a hoodie pretending to be Joe. So then you get into things like identity, and you kind of further that zero trust discussion. And then to create that biggest that ultimate loop is I also have to think about how to apply zero trust all the way into my resiliency and infrastructure structures, because I have to make sure that as I'm doing recoveries, it's the right people doing the recoveries at the right times, not somebody in a hoodie pretending to be me trying to recover data. So those are like some of the challenges I'd say. Your real question was what are those security challenges. One is recoverability. One is data validation, data integrity. The other one becomes access. The other one becomes identity management and data security. So those are kind of four legs of a stool that we end up in a lot of conversations with as customers think about, okay, well, where do I go first, and then what do I got to think about doing as I progress through, because I have to build the resilience for the enterprise.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of the things that drew me to this partnership to take over, really leading this joint go-to-market with IBM's Index Engines being the leader in data integrity validation, and IBM with your strength of being that big IBM, right? Having all of the resources of the security practice and of the other resiliency components.
Mm-hmm.
I think is really a symbiotic relationship that I would really enjoy.
Yeah, it's and like that's the like, and for me that's what's the some of the differentiators. Like what's different? Why do we look at it differently? Why do we bring a different approach? And why do healthcare customers kind of talk to you and I collectively? One of that is, yeah, there's a we have a larger part in the IBM ecosystem family. I'm going to say
Hmm.
family, larger part in the family around how do we leverage data security, identity management, as well as data resiliency, and then how do I start to think about those together? Does that mean you have to do them all at once? No. um,
Right.
I think you've heard me say it more than once, right? I can inject I can inject more change than you're ready for at any given moment sometimes when I start to look at an architecture. So the other thing that we end up having those conversations around is, okay, how do I take those steps? What are the steps I want to take to start to improve my resiliency, and then start to work on, and for me it's then I start to work on a few other things, because it usually becomes, okay, the one of those unique challenges is I got to be able to cover data. And maybe even pick up on your question a minute ago, but what are some of the other challenges we see in say healthcare environments is some of those databases is in the case of say Epic and whatnot are so big. That's another challenge to work with, because I'm working with these really large data sets. If they're 40 terabytes, if they're 50, if they're 60 or whatever, moving that kind of data or reverting to a snapshot on a subsystem, I save the time of moving the data over the network. So I'm not necessarily pulling something back that's 50 terabytes or 40 terabytes or something, but I still have to revert, no, it's a clean copy. So I have to think about those changes and that ability to how do I manage these things, because that is a challenge that is, specific to a lot of our healthcare customers. The size of that data becomes one more challenge you need to think through. So we usually start with, I think, resiliency, and then you'll see a lot of our customers start to talk about, well, how do I, you know, further build out that concept of zero trust and put, monitors, taps, things like that at the data level to be able to understand the right people are accessing at the right time, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I like what you said about you can inject more change than any organization is ready for at any given time. I think that brings
Yep.
us back to the point of starting with minimum viable company, right?
Yeah.
It's for the most critical Epic databases. How do we get that back up and running first, and then incrementally we can add how do we, and that's where the rest of the breadth of what IBM has to offer from a resiliency perspective comes in. It starts with what we do around the Sentinel offering with CyberSense and getting those core applications back up and running, and then it extends to uh, you know getting everything else back up and running and validating that and testing it and having a clean room and all those other things that IBM brings to bear.
Yeah,
And
and
you
and for
touched
me,
on it.
you're bang on, right? Like that where do I start first almost is I like that resiliency is a good place to start. And then to your point, like the capabilities between what we do with IBM Flash System and pairing that with Sentinel, with the index engines to be able to not only have, I'd say, two layers of augmentation for security, right? Two layers of augmentation being detection. I'm able to see things at the flash system level. So we have this capability in terms of real-time detection in the IBM Flash Core modules to tell you if a volume is being corrupted within, say, a minute, right? Within a really quick amount of time. But also then for those other creeping, small, sneaking other things in the data sets, say in the application layer that could also, nothing is perfect, right? Things will sneak past things. Being able to then use the flash system's immutable copy capability called safeguarded copy, and then validate
Mhm.
those data sets with an application aware tool, right? With Sentinel and with Index Engines engine being able to be application aware to the Epic systems, to VMware, those type of things that are kind of core pillars to run the organization. But being able to proactively mount those copies to validate, or reactively, um, and having them be application aware creates a really powerful, now I know my recovery and fallback points, right? That ability of, okay, what's the fastest way to recover on system, because I don't have to move data, I can revert. Well, is that copy clean? Now I know I've got an immutable copy that's been tested. Maybe I've tested them twice a day. Maybe I'm testing it once a day, and able to know that the depth with which we can get to with, say, Sentinel, the Index Engines engine of, I'm looking at the metadata, I'm looking at table spaces, I'm looking at content. That level of depth creates a really unique space and a really unique capability to come back faster, and to be able to know that that data set is clean, or at least valid enough that I could then bring it up for DBAs to start doing inspection. Because I have lots of customers that their next version is, okay, a human's going to inspect it, because we're humans, and we always want to take one more look type of thing, one more safety measure,
Mhm.
one more, hey, did Joe sign off on it? Okay, if Joe signed off on it, we're going back to production type of thing, right? I think that's the becomes the really unique power of, okay, I know I've got these things ready to go, and I know I can schedule them, or I know I can proactively run them. But that level of depth, and I mean, you may want to hit on it, right? That level of depth is like really interesting in terms of the capabilities, right?
Yeah, yeah. We talk about it all day here at Index Engines, right? It's a content validation. It's inspecting at the bit level. It's the giving you the virtual certainty that you have a clean copy, as opposed to, I think this is good, but do a lot more testing and validation. It just reduces that recovery time objective so significantly. As does, again, to what you touched on there, application awareness. That's something that
Mm-hmm.
IBM also brings to the table. So you pair the application aware snapshots of IBM with that that intimate content level inspection that Index Engines offers. I really think it's a differentiated approach.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of power there. And then, like I've been kind of alluding to, right, to be able to extend into the hypervisor, because you always have that, like, so if I look at my application is, say, in this case Epic is core, right? But then being able to say, okay, all the services that help me often live in the hypervisor, all the services that extend that, right? Whether, scaffolding isn't necessarily the term. I use the term, and I'm not sure I'm all the way in for that term yet. But the scaffolding is I think important. And what I mean by scaffolding is all those ancillary things that help make the application run, right? Whether it be Active Directory, or whether it be like an LDAP thing, or whether it just be application servers, or whatever. That often lives a lot in the hypervisor. So that other depth layer, being able to go and see VMware, um, adds another layer, because now I have to start to deal with the scaffolding constellation, also not the right analogy, but the things that surround that core application. Once I define, my minimum viable hospital in this case, like, it's going to be the application, then a bunch of other pieces around it that people access through the application, right? So, I find that there's a really interesting pairing of those two capabilities together. Go, okay, like, I'm hitting a good chunk of what's going to probably run the business of the institution, and I can create those immutable copies. I can validate those immutable copies. I can have them tested proactively. I can go back and reactively test them. And I'm not necessarily waiting on the lag time to move data. All I got to do is run it through the scan time. Yes, that takes time, because that's data we're crunching through, but that's really powerful, right?
Yeah, yeah. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but maybe we just spend a little more time on it. So, when you're talking to healthcare customers, how do you typically advise healthcare clients about what you kind of addressed there a little bit? Balancing the need for rapid recovery with also ensuring complete data integrity and security after a ransomware attack, right? We see instances where some of the most costly ransomware attacks are are instances where the customer was overconfident in their ability to restore quickly, and they restored corrupt data, they restored dormant executables, they had an incomplete restoration, had to do it multiple times. So how do you advise, is again in healthcare where that timeline is particularly important? How do you advise customers around that?
It's a nuanced it's a nuanced topic, is the right way to put it, I think. Um, Maybe my first tenant principle. First principle is we got to coordinate infrastructure with security. So one of the things that we often get talking to is we'll be actually in a room with both teams, because, and I think I've used this analogy before, is I need to, it's a left hand right hand, or I need to know what this team is doing and this team is doing, and I want to be coordinated. So sometimes you'll see us actually sit down and do process mapping. It isn't as maybe as exciting as I've like. In fairness, I think the engine, the scan engine, is really cool. So we should take a minute and talk about it. But the process mapping of, okay, when you're done here, I do this. When I'm done here, you do this. When you do this, I do this, and building that into some sort of flow, whether that is leveraging, like we've done some work with integrating that into a SOAR application, so that everyone is actually on the same playbook, for lack of a better way to put it, whether it's something like that, or it's a simpler flow, or it's a run book, or it's a something, but then knowing when I'm going to do things and what the coordination between infrastructure and security is. And I think it's really telling to your question, is I've actually seen a bunch of organizations, some of them healthcare, actually some of them financials as well, build kind of cross-functional teams, new teams that actually encompass people with the discipline and skill that we have necessarily in infrastructure, to then learn and partner with the skill and discipline that lives in security, and then do a little bit of cross training so we can speak each other's language. Because to your point of, like, if I recover something before somebody's ready, it could get reinfected. If I recover something into an environment that hasn't had all the bad actors eradicated, something could go bad again as well. So it becomes a, how do I not step on each other's foot as we're dancing together? Maybe not the right analogy, but how do I manage that? For me, process. A lot of it is process, but being able to understand what tooling I can inject in the process and what capabilities those tools bring me, right? Because of that idea, right? So the idea of the scan engine being able to validate the data set inside of Epic and say, hey, there's 3 levels I'm actually doing an inspection against. And I'm able to tell you where those problems might be. I'm able to alert you, even the strain of the maybe the ransomware variant that's actually hitting that data set, or has gone and hit that data set, but the copy before was clean. And being able to track those things, being able to feed that information up into security, becomes incredibly powerful for the, okay, how do I start to recover? And whether it's I'm going to go back and rerun some scans on a tool on the data set, or I'm going to leverage the catalog I've now built to say, how do we start to, when I'm ready, when you're ready, I can bring this back, and I know what I'm going to be able to do, and I know the process, and I've practiced the process. That's the other part of it for me, becomes, hey, how do we create that coordination between the two groups that historically haven't always worked well together? Being an infrastructure person for as long as I have been, only in the last few years have I made a bunch of friends in security. Before that, we'd I don't know about you, but we would see each other at, like, company picnic or whatever,
Right.
and that'd be when we'd see each other. So I'd like, oh, it's so and so, they're over there. Yeah, yeah. Do I know what they do every day? No. Can I speak the language? No. Now I happen to learn how to speak that language because of that integration between the two organizations, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think I saw statistics a couple months ago about the majority of infrastructure people see recovery and ransomware response as a security problem. The majority of security people see it as an infrastructure problem, getting the data back up and running. I think being able to stitch those two things together is really important for organizations, right? Not just having accountability, but having responsibility and understanding what everyone's role is and who is going to take ownership of what pieces. That's where we, again, to dovetail it into some of the things we talk about here at Index Engines, we think about recovery and resiliency as having 4 key pillars, right? And we always start with copies of your data, right? Safeguarded
Yep.
copies, snapshots, backups, all of that. That's obviously critical. Having a
Well, and
recovery
I dig
platform.
in
Go ahead.
I'm going to
Yeah,
dig in on those. I think we actually, like, I'll dig in on those, and I want to go to your next point. But I dig in on that, copies, and I got to make sure they're immutable, right? So one of the things I can do in Flash System
sure.
is create an immutable safeguarded copy, which can't be seen, can't be mounted. I will spin a copy off of that, and then I'll leverage that for testing, or I'll leverage that to revert. So, like, same thing in backups. I should have my backups should be immutable, should have them more in one place, and I should have the ability to make sure they're immutable so that even admins can't go in and take them down. I was, it was a different industry, but I was reading an article yesterday about an admin in another industry who gave out IDs and or sold their time to be able to go cause trouble. So those are some of the things I got to think about. Now, what was you said, 4 principles. So we did the first one. What's your next one?
Next one, recovery platform, right? And that's
Mhm.
where some of the other IBM solutions outside of just Sentinel come into play. But having
Yep.
somewhere that an isolated environment that you can recover to, whether that's building your own clean room or some of the off-the-shelf offerings that IBM has to offer, but somewhere clean to recover to is critical, obviously.
Somewhere clean to recover to, somewhere to test, right? Like the one thing,
Yeah.
one of the things I like what we do in Sentinel is actually have the scan engine, so I can set the scan engine aside, mount off the primary system, scan it. Great. And we've actually done some really cool designs with customers that have, dedicated IREs, isolated recovery environments that we can then, work to run a copy of Sentinel against as well. So it gets really interesting in terms of kind of the mix and match of the things I can do. And then to your point, other parts of that capability, right? Other parts of the capability around Sentinel, other parts around IBM Storage Defender, where I can start to integrate more than one thing, tie those things into a clean room. That all gets really interesting for me because now I have to think about, okay, well, where do I test my stuff if I don't have the ability to leverage the scan engine, but there are other applications I need to bring back? How do I start to organize myself in terms of recovery structures, recovery groups, as sometimes we'll talk about? All of those bits and pieces start to become really interesting as you start to map through how do I bring the business back? But then, to your point, I always start with, okay, what's the thing I got to bring back? In this case, probably an Epic application. In this case, probably some VMware. I know I can scan and proactively test those. Now I have some strength to build out and build other capabilities as well.
Yeah, yeah. And then, building off of that, where our technology really, brings something differentiated and contributes to these four pillars. That third pillar of ours of trusted data integrity. We talked already
Mm-hmm.
a lot about that, so we don't have to spend too much time on it. But I think it's just really important to remember that not just looking at signatures, not just looking at compression rates and other metadata and thresholds and how quickly the data is changing, but actually going in before you restore from something and knowing, validating the metadata, validating the header, validating the content. It is so important to give customers the confidence they need to be able to restore from that.
Well, and like there's a part of me that is in some of it, that's the secret sauce, right? Like that part of that
Mm-hmm.
secret sauce. And I think Joe, yeah, as much as you tease me about my analogy, because I talk a lot in analogies, that ability to not necessarily just, hey, I'm reading the data, but that ability to create the index in that data. Um, you know, I make that analogy of I'm able to actually go down and get the DNA of the data, so the DNA sequence, the individual genome sequence of the data, and then create that map of the genome or that map of the RNA structure. Works better when I have a slide, I guess, that has the pictures. Being able to see that versus read the whole data, I'm actually able to get to that genetic level of the data and then map that and then see the changes from point to point so that I can actually get to those three levels, right? The content, the metadata, and whatnot, and be able to see that and then design and look for, hey, where is there a corrupted piece? Where is there a challenge? That's an indication. Like that's a really part of the powerful capabilities that Sentinel's got that gets me going. This is different technology, and that's maybe the other big question I get a lot is, okay, so what's the scan engine is different from? It's in its own space, and that's one of the things that I will genuinely argue. It's in its own space. That's different from um, or adjacent, and maybe adjacent to, different from traditional security tools. That's not a bad thing. It means I'm adding
Yeah.
another way to actually find and interrogate the structure of the data. Like that is, I'm not going to say replace one for the other. This is an augment. This is a yes plus. This is a one plus, a yes and EDR tooling, the ability to have a scan engine actually understands the data and be a data aware. Those are powerful additions to an architecture that then let me go, okay, I'm increasing my confidence in being able to do recovery. That's huge. At least for me, if I'm looking at how do I bring a business back, right?
Yeah, no. I do always like to joke about the DNA metaphor, but I think it's apropos, especially when we're talking about healthcare, right?
We might be in
How
the right space,
recoverable is it?
exactly.
Exactly. And instead of just talking about these are my symptoms and this is the family history, and let's surmise what our best guess is of whether something is right or wrong. Go into the actual genome and say, well, let's map each individual gene to what we know them to be linked to, and that's really what we're doing with CyberSense, right? It's doing
Yeah.
that bit by bit level validation, and again, we put that in the context of epic environments. It's really powerful to know that we've gone through the data, that we haven't just checked to see if any of the known variants that we're worried about have corrupted it. We have gone through the actual data and detected that it is clean. You can restore from it. There are no dormant executables you need to worry about. That it's intact and there's not intermittent encryption that you're going to be restoring. So I
Well,
think that
and that's
that
maybe the other, and I would say that's maybe the other part that maybe we don't talk about enough. So I'll talk about it right now is because we're pairing together, like because we're paired together, right? We're working together to create something together. So not only do I have the say the ransomware detection inside the Flash system, and not only do I create those immutable copies that can't be removed or deleted by anybody on the system, but I'm also making them application aware, which dramatically improves the
mhm,
ability for that scan engine to look for those things. So I'm not only making just a crash consistent copy in our case, or in this case, in the case we're using here with Sentinel, I'm making an application aware copy, which synchronizes the data, flushes the buffers, gets it in a structure that makes it even clearer for the scan engine to go through, kind of helps minimize false positives even further because we're an application aware copy that we're indexing versus that crash consistent. So I think, Joe, that's the other thing I'd say is what's the extra secret sauce we're doing inside Sentinel is that part. And maybe we don't hit that enough. Maybe we don't talk about that as much as we could, because that makes a difference in how the scan engine's able to look at the genes, to understand the gene mapping, to understand if you've got a corruption in the gene, and look at it over time, because every time I make that copy, I'm able to create the application aware copy, scan it, build that gene map, and then look at it and do compare over time as well. Right? I'm in the right vein, right? Or in the right analogy structure.
in the right vein. Get another good medical analogy, right? I love it. I love it.
A lot of coffee this morning.
Never enough, never enough. Well, I know we're already over time, but we could talk about this for hours, I'm sure. But I think this is a good start, right? I think we've had an opportunity to share a little bit about how the collaboration between Index Engines and IBM is really offering healthcare customers uh, a comprehensive suite of everything they need from a security and resiliency perspective, but also something that specifically within the Sentinel solution is differentiated, right? That they're not getting anywhere else on the market. So, like I said, I'm very enthusiastic about this partnership. I really enjoyed working alongside you and the IBM team, Chris. Any parting words you want to share before we wrap up?
No, I'm the same way. I think like this is incredibly cool technology. It's incredibly poignant for the time it is we're dealing with, right? In terms of what's the most attacked, what's the most impacted
Yeah.
sectors. I mean, if you know, IBM X Force is another part of our family that actually does threat intelligence index and actually talks about what the industries that are impacted. Healthcare is on that top 10 list, right? The
Mhm.
time it is nice to be at this place where we have really interesting technology that can do stuff that nobody else can do, and provide that at a timely fashion. It's one thing to be ahead of the market, it's one thing to be behind the thing, but to be able to do something that actually addresses real world needs with, like I said, it's okay to geek out every once in a while. A little bit of cool technology that actually helps improve everybody's day to day and helps improve the recoverability of the business. I think is also really important. So it's kind of a nice space to be in. So that's like Joe, I'm right there with you. It's actually a lot of fun to work across the teams because we're doing something that has real impact and real effect and really helps people that we know need it because of the market in the space we're living in right now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I look forward to more conversations around that and talking to you a little bit more about it at IBM Tech Exchange this fall as well. I think we'll have some
Oh,
features
that's
around
a
this there.
That's a good reminder, actually. You know what? For anybody who didn't know, IBM Tech Exchange is first week of October. This is our large technical conference. I think we're going to be a little over 10,000 people this year at it. You will see me. You will see Joe. You will see a bunch of the IBM storage team, including a lot of our storage leadership, there as part of this, alongside the rest of the IBM technology family, and the people we cross over with. For perfect example, I was working with the data security and the identity teams yesterday, because we're going to have sessions that we're each dipping into and helping because customers are talking to us about, I need cyber security and I need data resiliency and I need them to talk to each other. So there's a great chance to go see that, and plus get depth on some cool stuff around Sentinel.
Yeah, yeah, we'll definitely be talking Sentinel. Index Engines will be there in full force.
Awesome.
All right. Well, thank you again, Chris. We really appreciate your time. Thank you for joining Ask the Expert. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and for hopefully sticking with us through an extra couple of minutes. Like I said, we could talk about this topic for hours. So if you want to have a one-off conversation about it, myself and Chris are available to do that as well. Thanks, everyone, for
Oh,
joining, and look forward to hearing from you soon.
thanks
Thanks,
everybody.
Chris.